Read Japanese Literature. My name is Allison Fincher. Read Japanese Literature is a podcast about Japanese fiction and some of its best works. All the works we discuss are available in translation, so you can read along if you want, and you can find out more at readjapaneseliterature.com. Welcome to Season 5. First, I'm happy to announce that Read Japanese Literature has a new and improved website for Season 5, thanks to our web designer Adam Solove. You can listen to podcast episodes directly on the website. I'm cleaning up the episode pages. The website is much more searchable. I'm working on getting a page up for every author, starting with the authors we've covered on the podcast and the authors I've reviewed for the Asian Review of Books, and the authors whose work has been translated most recently into English. These pages include a list of every book in English translation that I can find by each author. They'll also show you every list that author's work appears on the RJL site. There are more translator credits on the RJL website than ever before, and that's going to continue being an ongoing project. We're not finished with all the improvements either. Keep checking readjapaneseliterature.com. I'm also excited about everything else Read Japanese Literature has in store for this season. I'm planning to take a look at the life of Lafcadio Hearn. A Patreon subscriber has suggested an episode about Japanese authors whose work appears in films. Maybe an episode on the Japanese cell phone novel. I hope you always feel free to contribute ideas through Patreon or on one of RJL's social media accounts. Today, we're talking about bullying in Japanese literature. It's a fairly pervasive motif, especially since the beginning of the English-language Japanese fiction boom in the late 2010s. We're going to start out by defining bullying and looking at bullying in Japan in a school context and its relationship to school absenteeism. We'll also talk about other kinds of bullying in Japan, especially workplace bullying. We'll look at examples of all kinds of bullying in a few Japanese novels, and we'll end with a look at Mizuki Tsujimura and her novel Lonely Castle in the Mirror, translated into English by Philip Gabriel. A quick content warning: this episode will discuss, obviously, bullying, as well as suicide. If these aren't safe topics for you, I strongly suggest that you skip this episode. Let's start with a pretty basic question. What is bullying? Bullying can sometimes be a little bit in the eye of the beholder, but there are basic elements of a definition more or less everyone agrees on. I'm going to give you the definition from the American Psychological Association Dictionary of Psychology. According to the APA, bullying is, quote, persistent, threatening, and aggressive physical behavior or verbal abuse directed toward other people, especially those who are younger, smaller, weaker, or in some other situation of relative disadvantage. When we talk about bullying, we tend to think about it at school and among children, and that kind of bullying happens everywhere. In 2019, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, much better known as UNICEF, published a document called Behind the Numbers: Ending School Violence and Bullying. UNICEF found that globally, almost 1 in 3 students had been bullied by their peers at least once in the last month. So what about in Japan? If you hang around in places where fans of Japanese culture are online, you'll likely hear the term ijime to refer to Japanese bullying. But to keep using the word ijime instead of bullying, it's really almost a way to orientalize or exoticize a global phenomenon. It's just bullying. There are some bullying techniques that are more prevalent in Japan than in other places, but bullying is bullying, whether we leave the Japanese word untranslated or not. When it comes to some of those more prevalent kinds of bullying in Japan, In Japan, there's an organization focused on raising awareness of bullying and bullying prevention called Ijime SOS. They list common forms of bullying like shunning and isolation, violence, destruction of the victim's property, and extortion. That means demanding the victim's money. MEXT is Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Science, and Technology. MEXT has been defining bullying in Japan since 1986. That first definition had 3 elements. It defined bullying as a one-sided attack on someone weaker. Bullying is conducted repeatedly, and bullying causes significant physical and mental harm. A more recent definition from MEXT defines school bullying as, quote, an act by a student or students toward another student that inflicts some physical or psychological consequence, causing the receiving child mental or physical suffering. In the late aughts, there were also attempts to revise the definition of bullying to consider it more of a relationship between 2 students, not necessarily a power dynamic where there is one bully and one victim. The story of how and why MEXT came to have a definition of bullying isn't a happy one at all. It began with a 13-year-old boy named Hirofumi Shikagawa living in Morioka, the capital of Iwate Prefecture, in the mid-1980s. Iwate is part of the Tohoku region we've talked about, and Morioka is about 4 hours away from Tokyo by train. Hirofumi had spent months enduring heckling, beatings, being marked up with a pen, and having his belongings damaged or destroyed. And his teachers knew. One testified he thought of it as playful mischief. Some teachers took part in a mock funeral for Hirofumi, held by the other kids who were bullying him. By January 1986, Hirofumi had all but dropped out of middle school. In February, 13-year-old Hirofumi Shikagawa hanged himself in a railway toilet in Morioka. In his suicide note, he wrote, "I don't want to die yet, but it's like living in hell to go on living like this." Sadly, greater attention to bullying since Shikagawa's suicide hasn't stopped cases like this from happening. To list just one of many, many tragic examples, in 2012, a 13-year-old boy in Otsu lost his life to suicide after bullies forced him to practice committing suicide. Bullying is just one of the many factors contributing to Japan's high youth suicide rate. And Japan's youth suicide rate is exceptionally high and not anywhere close to the global average. In 2022, the suicide rate for 15 to 19-year-olds in Japan was 1.5 times higher than in Canada, more than double the rate in the UK, and 4 times higher than the rate in France. It was even 120 times the youth suicide rate in the US, the developed nation with the next highest number of youth suicides in that study. Greater attention to school bullying hasn't stopped bullying from happening either. A 2019 study found 32.8% of Japanese students in grades 4 through 9 had witnessed bullying in the last 2 to 3 months. 11.8% had carried out acts of bullying. Of those, 8.3% were in one of those relationships where 2 students were bullying each other. Only about 3% were purely bullies. And 27.6% of Japanese school children in grades 4 through 9 had been victims of bullying in the last 2 to 3 months. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot. And you can't quite compare this number to the global average from the UNICEF study because it's bad statistics to compare data from 2 different studies. But I do want to remind you that the UNICEF study found globally almost a third of school kids reported being bullied in the last month. So while the statistics in Japan are terrible, they're also not that far off from the global average. The kinds of bullying in Japan have definitely shifted over time, especially in the last decade. Visible violence has decreased. Bullying at school has decreased. Today, a lot of bullying takes the form of cyberbullying and exclusion on social media. In the words of Terumi Okaku, CEO of the grief support and suicide prevention organization Live On, quote, "In the past, bullying only happened at school, but now it follows kids home because of social media." There are known reasons bullying in Japan can be especially severe and can go on without being punished or appropriately dealt with. The nature of the Japanese school system is a big one. In Japanese schools, homeroom teachers are supposed to provide guidance for students' psychological and social development. They counsel students, visit their families, create a community in their classrooms. Well, Japanese homeroom teachers are supposed to take responsibility for the social and emotional well-being of their students, but they are way overworked already. A 2018 survey showed that Japanese junior high school teachers work 56 hours a week, compared to a global average of just 38 hours a week in most developed countries. I'm an American, and if you've listened to many episodes of this podcast, you know I don't like to throw stones from my glass house. I will note that the US is also an exception. American teachers work an average of 53 hours a week. If a Japanese homeroom teacher acknowledges bullying in their class, the consequences for that teacher can be pretty significant. An increased workload while they're dealing with the bullying, damage to their reputation, fewer opportunities for promotion, and even reduced compensation. The Japanese school system is set up so ideally, every Japanese student has the opportunity to receive the same education regardless of where they live. As an American, this sounds pretty nice, but it can certainly be carried through to a fault. As Japanese anti-bullying lawyer Mariko Mashimo explained in a TED Talk, quote, "Teachers view both the bullies and the bullied as their students. They are reluctant to label students they care for as the bully or the bullied. Terms like trouble with friends and personal disagreements are pretty common." Sometimes those terms are relevant. Those bullying relationships really do exist. But sometimes using terms like trouble with friends hides the reality of what's really going on and fails to protect the victim of bullying. Bullying in Japan is linked to the problem of school refusal, futoko. MEXT defines futoko as, quote, "children who don't go to school for more than 30 days for reasons unrelated to health or finances." Futoko is also translated as absenteeism, truancy, or even school phobia. The Asahi Shimbun is one of Japan's most important newspapers. It used MEXT data to issue a report that there were 346,482 cases of school refusal among primary and middle school students in 2023. That number does not include students who are chronically ill or from families who are in financial distress. In 2023 marked 11 straight years the cases of school refusal increased. It's really important to acknowledge bullying isn't the only cause of school refusal. It's not even the most important cause of school refusal. That same Asahi Shimbun article noted that 26% of students said they were refusing to go to school because of bullying. 29% of guardians said their students weren't attending school because of bullying. Only 4% of teachers said their students weren't attending school because of bullying, which is a pretty disturbing disconnect. But students cited other reasons too. You'll notice that these numbers are going to add up to more than 100%. Students were allowed to cite more than one reason they were staying home. 77% of Futoko students said they were depressed or generally uneasy. 70% said they were exhausted and couldn't get up in the morning. I'll note that that can be a symptom of depression. 69% said they just don't feel well. Again, possibly a symptom of depression. Half said they weren't sure they could get their homework finished. An alarming 42% said they were addicted to games or their smartphones. I should also mention that Futoko is related to, but separate from, the issue of hikikomori. Hikikomori is another Japanese group that gets endless media attention. The word literally means pulling inward or being defined. These are people who live in extreme isolation, sometimes refusing to leave their home. Again, there's a certain level of Orientalism here in the term hikikomori. The Japanese label hikikomori sounds more exotic than recluse or hermit or shut-in. There are certainly large numbers of people who would qualify as hikikomori in many countries, including much of Europe and the United States. Hikikomori now has an official definition from the Japanese Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. Hikikomori is a condition in which the individuals affected refuse to leave their parents' house, do not work or go to school, and isolate themselves away from society and family in a single room for a period exceeding 6 months. No one is quite sure how many hikikomori there are. Estimates range from the hundreds of thousands to over 1 million. But a student who is a hikikomori refuses to go to school, but many kids who refuse to go to school are not hikikomori. Free schools are one solution for futoko. A free school is a place designated for students who aren't able to attend school because of bullying or other circumstances. It usually offers a less structured learning environment. Often students get to decide what they learn and how. Free schools are almost always much smaller than conventional schools and provide a lower pressure environment for students to build both academic and social skills. The free school movement took off in Japan in the 1980s. They're an accepted alternative to compulsory education, but students leave school without a recognized qualification. School bullying comes up pretty often in translated Japanese fiction. That's maybe especially notable because there aren't actually that many Japanese books for kids and young adults being translated. I'm going to talk about several books that bring up school bullying. The first one was written for kids. The others weren't. School bullying isn't a new phenomenon in Japanese literature. A season 4 episode, Japanese Writers Standing Up to the State, tackled Genzaburo Yoshino's 1937 children's novel, How Do You Live? The protagonist, 15-year-old Copper, has to deal with some pretty serious bullies at his school. These are athletic older students, heroes of the school judo team. They want the younger students to be more manly and tough and to be more respectful of them, the older students on the judo team. The lead up to the climax involves a pretty serious act of violence by these older students. And you might remember that the bullies in How Do You Live also stand in for the nationalists in power in Japan in 1937. It's a little bit allegorical. The judo team rails against students without enough school spirit. Quote, "Make no mistake. Once they enter society, students with no love of school will surely become citizens with no love of country. People who don't love their country are traitors. Therefore, we can say that students who don't love their country are traitors in training. We must discipline any such fledgling traitors." The other books I'm going to discuss today are more recent. We've also covered the novel Go by Zainichi Korean author Kazuki Kaneshiro. Go was published in Japan in 2000. The protagonist, Sugihara, is a Zainichi Korean student attending a Japanese high school in Japan in the 80s, 90s. Honestly, Kaneshiro's setting is really vague. Especially in the 20th century, many Zainichi Korean students attended Korean schools to avoid bullying. They went to special schools set aside for Korean students taught in Korean rather than Japanese public schools. One of Sugihara's friends was bullied so badly by Japanese kids in his neighborhood that he chooses to go to the Korean school because he, quote, might have been bullied and killed himself if he went to a Japanese high school. When he describes the neighborhood boys' bullying, he says if you tried to record and televise the way they were speaking to him at the time, quote, all you'd hear is one long bleep. Somewhat ironically, Sugihara was bullied at his Korean school because he wanted to leave. And he was bullied by his teachers. One slaps him so hard his eardrum bursts. He gets called an ethnic traitor and a sellout. It turns out that these Zainichi Korean kids are damned if they do and damned if they don't. Fortunately, the situation has slowly improved for Zainichi Koreans in Japan since the 1990s. Translator Takami Nieda was impressed by the way Sugihara is, quote, willing to drop-kick discrimination and face adversity head-on. She said in an interview that, quote, if I'd known this book, if I'd known Sugihara in person, that would have kind of opened the doors in terms of how an Asian kid in a majority white culture could have acted toward injustices and prejudices and bullying and stuff like that. And it is a pretty empowering read. The final, more contemporary school bullying novel I want to bring up is Mieko Kawakami's Heaven. We've talked about Mieko Kawakami, but not about this specific novel. Heaven is likely the most painful novel about bullying from Japan that's available in English translation. The characters in Heaven are middle schoolers. A side note that Japanese readers are generally more willing to read about teenage protagonists in novels written for adults. Americans watch grown-up TV shows about teenage protagonists all the time, like Riverdale or Sex Education. I don't know why we think books about teenagers need to have a special label. Anyway, I spoke with a translator once who mentioned that publishers assumed Heaven could be marketed in translation as a YA novel. Absolutely not. Almost all the content warnings on this one, it is a serious adult read. The unnamed protagonist of Heaven has a lazy eye. We get to know him by his cruel nickname, Eyes. That's the only name we, the readers, get. Eyes thinks his lazy eye is disgusting, quote, like a slimy deep-sea fish from a hidden world. He has one friend, a girl, Kojima, and she's a victim of bullying too. Now, when I say this novel is painful, I really, really mean it. Eyes' bully suggests to his co-conspirators, quote, let's make a railroad, and shoots staples into Eyes' palm. Eyes tells us the little holes they leave sting worse than bees. The novel isn't just an exercise in sadism, though. There are high literature sadistic Japanese novels that seem like pure sadism, to me at least. Heaven just isn't one of them. Heaven is actually a gorgeous meditation on the meaning of suffering. His fellow victim Kojima thinks that living with weakness, accepting it completely, is the greatest strength in the whole world. On the other hand, one of Eyes' tormentors is just a nihilist. Everyone does things they don't want people doing back. Predators eat prey, and school serves no real purpose other than separating the kids who have what it takes from those who don't. Eyes has to figure out if his experiences mean something bigger, at least to him. There are a lot of other books I could mention here that bring up school bullying in Japan. Realistic fiction like Chesel's The Color of the Sky is the Shape of My Heart. That's another work about Zainichi Koreans. Thrillers like Natsuo Kirino's Grotesque. Literary surrealism like stories in Natsuko Imamura's Asa, the Girl Who Turned into a Pair of Chopsticks. Horror like Koshun Takami's Battle Royale. or middle grade fantasy like Miyuki Miyabe's Brave story. You can find an incomplete list on RJL's website. School bullying is present enough in Japanese culture that it appears in all kinds of stories. And of course, there are many, many stories of school bullying in English, and I assume in many other languages too. There are other kinds of bullying in Japan. One of the most prominent is bullying in the workplace, including power harassment or pawahara. Legally speaking, there are 3 criteria that have to be met for a behavior to qualify as power harassment. First, the behavior has to be carried out by someone with power over you. Someone with power over you is rather loosely defined. It includes, obviously, your boss, but also your colleagues or even your subordinates who wield power through their, quote, numbers or through control of essential knowledge or experience. Second, the behavior has to be beyond what is necessary and reasonable for the conduct of business. And third, the behavior has to be harmful for your working life. That definition is pretty vague. A popular Japanese TV show picked up some of the slack. Harassment Games developed its own list on which Japanese media has since elaborated. Today, a company or manager can exercise power harassment related to alcohol and drinking, age, gender, restructuring, political beliefs, and good old sexual harassment. There's burahara, harassment of people based on superstition about people with particular blood types, childcare harassment of people taking childcare leave, care harassment of caregivers, childless harassment of people without kids, marihara and shinhara of single people, tekuhara of people who are bad with technology, rimuhara and terehara for people who work remotely or by telework. One 2016 survey by the Japanese Bureau of Health, Labor, and Welfare found about a third of Japanese workers reported being subject to power harassment in the past 3 years. Now, let me remind you that the Japanese media has a penchant for naming things. That doesn't mean that these forms of workplace harassment don't exist in other parts of the world. Well, I'm not sure how widely people are harassed based on their blood type, but there are Americans who pick on people with red hair, so... Unfortunately, the prominent law trying to combat pawahara has been insufficient. Sometimes it's even backfired. A researcher named Suilin Ho found that a 2020 law that obliges employers to take measures to prevent workplace bullying in pawahara has actually empowered many employers to legitimize the ways they discriminate against female managers. Big surprise. One woman Ho interviewed tried to report her boss for forcing her to attend online drinking parties and do his personal errands outside of work. She was told these demands were part of her job because the man was her manager. And wasn't she proud to be so trusted? But the woman was guilty of power harassment for emailing her own subordinates after hours. And she could have managed communications more professionally when conveying her superior's messages to others. Anyway, that law, the Comprehensive Labor Policy Promotion Act, was passed after complaints of workplace bullying received by Japan's Bureau of Health, Labor, and Welfare more than doubled in the decade between 2002 and 2012. Today, some workers feel so harassed, they actually hire someone else to resign on their behalf. Harassment isn't the only reason to hire a resignation service, but one of the estimated 100 companies running such a service reported they had handled 20,000 resignations on clients' behalfs as of fall 2024. The service costs about $150 or 110 British pounds or about 130 euro. Matahara, maternity harassment, is a particularly insidious kind of harassment that affects Japanese women. It happens when a pregnant person is bullied, fired, or pressured into quitting. Again, this is one I know for a fact affects women outside of Japan. 20% of Japan's women who have been pregnant report maternity harassment. The stats are worse for women working in part-time jobs. Nearly half of them report being victims of maternity harassment. Maternity harassment is illegal under the Japanese Constitution, but the law is almost unenforceable. I'm going to introduce you to two books, two very different books about workplace bullying. One, an Akutagawa-winning work of high literature, and the other, a fantasy mystery by today's Focus author, Mizuki Tsujimura. Junko Takase won the Akutagawa Prize for May You Have Delicious Meals in 2022. Honestly, the book jacket copy for May You Have Delicious Meals almost sounds like the setup for a rom-com. Ashikawa is the kind of woman Nitani knows he will likely marry, sweet, obliging, and determined to wean him off his addiction to instant noodles. Oshio is bolder, uninhibited. She is Nitani's drinking buddy. In the oppressive office atmosphere, the pair grows closer, both outsiders struggling with the rigid status quo. But this is high literature. Quite frankly, Japanese high literature isn't going to be a rom-com. Nitani and Oshio bond over their mutual dislike of Ashikawa, whom Nitani is secretly dating. Neither of them appreciates Ashikawa's work ethic. Ashikawa was harassed at a previous workplace and can't handle men yelling at her, so angry clients are assigned to someone else. She goes home early because of a weak constitution. She doesn't work overtime. And she bakes a lot. It's her hobby. She tends to make delicious and beautifully homemade desserts to make up for her unreliability as a coworker. Oshio and Nitani, and probably some of their other coworkers, would rather Ashikawa just stay the full workday instead. Oshio asks Nitani to join her in bullying Ashikawa, although she almost immediately laughs off her request as a joke. She settles on the line that she's, quote, less bullying Ashikawa than just, being normal. Both Nitani and Oshio take to quietly throwing away Ashikawa's homemade desserts. In Oshio's mind, she is being bullied by Ashikawa, too. The more enduringly pathetic Ashikawa is, the more power it holds over the people around her. At least according to Oshio. May You Have Delicious Meals is a fairly ambiguous book. There aren't really any characters who come out smelling like roses, and it's pretty clear that the company itself, where Nitani, Oshio, and Ashikawa work, is toxic. It's really the problem. I'll add, as an aside, that the reader learns Nitani is more sexually attracted to Ashikawa because he doesn't respect her. He likes, quote, unreliable, weak-seeming, sweet girls, especially ones that are delicate and slim. The entire dynamic is pretty gross, but not necessarily on topic for today. Mizuki Tsujimura's Yamihara is a rather odd book, too. I learned from Dr. Catherine Hemmon's review of the novel that Yamihara is yet another type of harassment in Japan. Yamihara means shadow harassment. Shadow harassment happens when someone seems to be acting nice toward you when they're actually manipulating you with gaslighting. If you aren't aware of the term gaslighting in the year of our Lord 2025, it comes from a very old movie in which a husband uses the old gaslights in their house to make his wife think there is someone else home when there's not. It means denying the facts that are in front of someone else's face in order to make them doubt the truth of their own reality. You come to doubt yourself when you're being shadow harassed. It doesn't look like bullying, so most of the people around you think you're being treated well by the person bullying you. Yamihara actually takes up shadow harassment in several contexts over the course of 4 interlinked short stories. In one, a romantic relationship goes south when an older boy starts protecting his kohai girlfriend. In another, a group of PTA moms is dominated by a super volunteer. Boy, did that one hit hard. Hemon describes it as, quote, particularly disturbing in its exploration of the many ways adult women can be evil to one another. In yet another story, an excellent student takes on a mentoring role for the wealthy class clown that soon spins out of control. It's the story Coworker that I'd like to bring up. In Coworker, Suzuki feels bad for his often berated associate, Jin. Suzuki notes that the way Jin is being treated is workplace abuse. Quote, a picture-perfect example of worker harassment. The boss who harasses Jin isn't a great guy. He's sexist to another female coworker. He badgers Suzuki for not going out drinking. He's not a shadow harasser. He's an actual harasser. Eventually, Suzuki discovers that his boss spends hours after work every day having conversations with Jin. He shares that knowledge with their entire department, and the result isn't pretty for their boss. Coworker is maybe a little less developed and perhaps less plausible than the others in the collection. There is more to Jin, it turns out, than meets the eye. Quote, everyone has words they long to hear, Jin explains to Suzuki. When you satisfy that for them, they'll relinquish everything you want to know. They'll place themselves in your hands. There's a supernatural element in Yamihara that links the 4 short stories together. It really isn't necessary, but it does make the book into more of a novel and more of a typical Tsujimura production. And on that note, Mizuki Tsujimura was born on Leap Day, February 29th, 1980. She's from Fuefuki in Yamanashi Prefecture. Fuefuki is almost straight west from Tokyo, between 2 and 2.5 hours by train. Mizuki Tsujimura's career is an interesting example of how translation can change our perception of an author. There are only 4 books by Tsujimura available in English translation. One is Lonely Castle in the Mirror, more or less a low fantasy novel. Another is Yamihara, a low fantasy/horror novel. And then 2 volumes of a, so far, cozy fantasy series called The Go-Between, made up of Lost Souls Meet Under a Full Moon and How to Hold Someone in Your Heart. FYI, How to Hold Someone in Your Heart is out now in the UK, no date yet for the release in North America. But Tsujimura is actually a mystery writer. And when you know that, it can even change your perspective on her books available in English, too. Hold that thought for just a minute. Tsujimura has known she wanted to be a mystery writer for almost her entire life. While still in grade school, she read Yukito Ayatsuji's untranslated yet Murder at Jukuku Hall and started writing her own mysteries. She chose to attend Chiba University because there was a mystery research group there. And she published her first novel, the untranslated yet, A School Frozen in Time, or Time Stops in the Ice Cold School, in 2004 when she was in her early 20s. Tsujimura has been nominated for the Naoki Prize many times. The Naoki Prize is the parallel prize to the Akutagawa Prize. It's awarded to authors of popular fiction rather than high literary fiction. Tsujimura finally won in 2012 for her untranslated yet I Saw a Dream Without a Key. Tsujimura also won the Japan Booksellers Award in 2018 for Lonely Castle in the Mirror. A quick fact about Lonely Castle in the Mirror that may surprise anyone who has already read it. Lonely Castle in the Mirror was also nominated for the Mystery Writers of Japan Award the year it was published in Japan. The judges ultimately concluded it was more fantasy than mystery, but there are a couple of mysteries to solve in the novel. There will be some spoilers in this section of the episode, but I'm not even going to touch on the mysteries. I'll leave those for you to find and solve on your own, so there will be plenty of reasons to pick up Tsujimura's novel after you've listened to the episode. The protagonist of Lonely Castle in the Mirror is a 12-year-old, first-year junior high school student named Kokoro Anzai. The name Kokoro means heart. Her name plays a role in the novel, and it's appropriate for her character in general. Kokoro has been ruthlessly bullied by other girls in her class. The bullying has been psychological instead of physical, but it has been profoundly painful nonetheless. Why did they pick on me like that? She wonders. They gave her the silent treatment. They whispered about her behind her back. They told other girls not to have anything to do with her. They laughed and laughed, laughing at her, Kokoro. Because of the bullying, Kokoro has become a non-attendee and no longer goes to school. She refuses to tell her parents why. The trouble started over a guy she was friends with in elementary school. A popular girl at Kokoro's new middle school, named Miori Sanada, found out that this boy liked Kokoro before he developed a crush on Miori. And that was it. Miori began a protracted bullying campaign against Kokoro that involved most of her classmates. Miori talked the guy into telling Kokoro, "Ugly girls like you are the pits." She told Kokoro, "You're so dumb. You can die for all I care." Events quickly escalated. One afternoon, a crowd of girls showed up at Kokoro's house. "Come out, you wuss," one of them cried. Kokoro desperately checked all the locks while her classmates banged on her front and back door, rattled the windows. Kokoro was convinced they were trying to get in, and she lay on the floor filled with guilt. She, quote, silently asked her parents to forgive her. These kids she didn't know had trespassed into the grounds of their house while they were out and had trampled all over her mother's precious garden. When these kids can't get inside to get to Kokoro, it's the instigator, Miori, who starts to cry, and her classmates console Miori. Since that day, Kokoro has tried to convince herself that she hadn't been at home at all. Quote, Miori and the others had simply pounded on the door of an empty house, trampled over the patio, gone round and round the outside of the house, but nothing actually happened, nothing at all. She was never about to be killed. The longer Kokoro has waited, the more afraid she is to tell her parents what happened. Kokoro's homeroom teacher, Mr. Ida, hasn't been any help at all. Kokoro believes teachers are, quote, invariably on the side of students like Miori Sanada, who stand out, the ones who speak confidently in class, who play with their friends at break, the lively, straightforward ones. And it seems like she's not wrong. Mr. Ida in particular shows clear favoritism to some of his students, even by dropping the respectful honorifics at the ends of their names. It's Mr. Ida's job to keep visiting Kokoro's house to check on her, but she hates it. Even after he learns the full story of what happened, he attempts to mediate between Kokoro and Miori, believing, of course, there was a mistake. The bullying has to have been two ways. He tries to talk Kokoro into meeting with Miori. She's the kind of girl that people often misunderstand, Mr. Ida explains. While Kokoro is still reeling from all of this, one day she's home alone and her bedroom mirror begins to shine. She discovers she can walk through it, and so she does. You might ask yourself, why would she do this? But I think she has a reasonable explanation. She asks herself, how could a portal into another world not be appealing? On the other side of the mirror, she meets a young girl dressed in a wolf mask who calls herself the Wolf Queen. The Wolf Queen also introduces her to 6 other Little Red Riding Hoods, other middle schoolers, and reveals a special quest one and only one of them can solve to earn themselves a special wish. Over the course of several months, the kids discover that all but one of them is currently refusing to go to school. When she finds that they have this in common, Kokoro easily identifies why some of the kids don't go to school. There's, quote, one of those boys, for example, in love with the idea of love. The girls in the castle all agree that he is a pain in the neck. But Kokoro is baffled by some of the others. They all seem so normal. She learns over time that many of them have been victims of bullying of one kind or another. Notably, one kid had been a part of one of those reciprocal bullying relationships. She was popular and found herself bullying other people. Her classmates got sick of it and turned against her with a passion. Another was called out and bullied for his compulsive lying. Now he's lonely and ashamed. A third is still being bullied by his older brother. There's a fourth kid I want to spend a little extra time on. It's a kid named Ureshino, and he's probably the most immature kid who visits the castle, even though there are several other kids his age. The reader gets a fuller account of his life than we do of what happened to some of the other kids in the castle. And his story sounds a little more like what we might expect when we hear the word bullying, even though Tsujimura has given it a little bit of nuance. Ureshino is presented mostly as a pest for the first third of the novel, but at the end of part one, really the climax of the first third of the novel, Kokoro is horrified to realize that she and the other kids in the castle have effectively been bullying Ureshino by making it obvious how much they wish he weren't there. He's the pain-in-the-neck kid who is in love with being in love, so some of the shunning, especially the girls' avoidance, is maybe deserved, but the overall treatment might not be. And there hasn't been a lot of empathy. Ureshino announces that he is better than all of them because he is going to go back to school for the new semester. Days later, though, he returns to the castle, gauze on his face, his arm bandaged, his face swollen. Ureshino explains, "Boys in my class did this to me. It wasn't like I was being bullied or anything. It was guys I made friends with in junior high. We got on fine. They'd come to my house to play video games. We'd go to juku, cram school, together. I thought we were friends. But then things got a little weird." As he explains the behavior that led up to this assault, Kokoro reflects, she'd known boys like that since elementary school, who'd talk about you behind your back, tease you, and sometimes go too far. She'd never thought about that kind of behavior as bullying either. But maybe it is. Ureshino continues, "When they'd come to my house, I'd give them drinks and ice cream and stuff, and I felt sorry for them since they didn't get any spending money from their parents. So when we went out, I paid for their food. After a while, they just started expecting it for me to always pay. But the more I did it, the more they respected me, the more they tried to please me. It wasn't as if they were making me do it, was it? But the teacher at our juku found out and told my parents, and my father blew his top." Ureshino's father's words to him were really pretty cruel. "Aren't you ashamed trying to buy friends like that?" That's not the only way his parents' response has harmed Ureshino. They impose the entire Japanese bullying narrative on Ureshino, and that hurts him too. According to my parents, he says, I was being bullied, and kids who are bullied blame themselves and often consider suicide. They read books on the subject and were really worried about me. It's so stupid because I never thought I wanted to die. It's obvious this narrative about school bullying is pretty common. Another boy says his father lets him stay home because his parents know all about the hideous things that go on in school these days. There's news all the time, isn't there, about bullying and all kinds of underhand things and how kids commit suicide. My dad said, there's no way we're going to make him go if it means school will kill him. But this narrative doesn't fit Ureshino's situation, and being forced into it has been painful for Ureshino. And yet, while Ureshino is clearly telling the truth about his school and his family, He's also in denial about what has happened to him. Ureshino is only admitting to himself now, returning to the castle covered in bruises, how badly he's been abused by the boys he thought were his friends, and he's still trying to claim it wasn't bullying. The kids in the castle are also futoko for the same sorts of reasons many Japanese kids start refusing to go to school. An overwhelming pressure to perform, parental neglect or abuse, grief. Free school comes up often in Lonely Castle in the Mirror, too. There's this free school near Kokoro's house, coincidentally, called Kokoro no Kyoshitsu, which Philip Gabriel translates as classroom for the heart, but more literally means something like living room for the heart. Of course, the word coincidentally never actually applies in literature because the author has made that coincidence for us. Anyway, one of the kids describes the free school as, quote, the type of place parents first turn to when their kids stop going to school and they're confused what to do. Many of the kids see the free school as a potential resource, as a respite from the circumstances that drove them from school in the first place. Many of them see it as a source of hope. And yet all of them are initially too afraid to try attending. Lonely Castle in the Mirror is not a perfect novel, and it's really not one of my favorites, although there are a lot of things about Lonely Castle to recommend it. Personally, I think its pacing is a little odd. In most low fantasy that starts in the real world but reveals a magical world underneath or parallel to ours, the excitement takes place in that magical second world. But until the climax, the challenges the characters face in Lonely Castle in the Mirror are in the real world. These are bullying victims, kids who have faced difficult life situations. The castle in the mirror is a retreat from danger for them. They go there to chat with each other or catch up on schoolwork in peace or play video games. But despite its flaws, Lonely Castle in the Mirror is still a compelling work of fiction, written with real empathy for the way bullied adolescent characters might actually feel. So why should we read Japanese novels about bullying? Should we read Japanese novels about bullying? I hope I've made the case that, in some ways, a lot of people west of Japan have an inaccurate and exoticized picture of the bullying situation in Japan. That doesn't mean there isn't a lot of bullying in Japan, or that the bullying in Japan is okay. It just means that we can't have cultural blinders on and deny that bullying and other problems exist in our own countries too, just because we don't have exotic-sounding names for them. Hikikomori, matahara, ijime, or even karoshi, death by overwork. Bullying has been a problem in Japan for a long time. It's also a problem people in Japan have been aware of for a long time. It's been a problem it has taken a long time to begin to get better, if it has started to get better. Again, the number of reported instances of bullying at school has declined in the past few years in Japan, but cyberbullying has become a bigger problem. Because bullying has been so present in the Japanese imagination, there are some really good and really important books that take up bullying. I hope at least one of the books we've talked about today sounds like something you'd like to pick up on your own. Personally, my recommendations for books about bullying would be Mieko Kawakami's Heaven for deep thinking. Again, lots of content warnings on that one. Ginzaburo Yoshino's How Do You Live as an allegory for the times. And Mizuki Tsujimura's Yamihara for good, chilling fun. But all of the books we've talked about today, and many of the books on RGL's list of bullying in Japanese literature, are worth a look. Our focus text today has been Mizuki Tsujimura's Lonely Castle in the Mirror, translated by Philip Gabriel. North Americans can buy their copy of that book or most books I mention on the podcast from Read Japanese Literature's bookshop to support RJL. Check it out through the website. A special thank you to new Patreon supporters, Svetla and Jason, and all of our Patreon supporters. You can join them by visiting patreon.com/readjapaneseliterature. Patreon supporters also get a weekly newsletter from RJL with new releases of Japanese literature in English translation, as well as bonus content for most episodes. Stay tuned for our next episode, which takes up the life and work of Yakumo Koizumi, better known in English as Lafcadio Hearn. We'll be looking at his version of the old Japanese ghost story, The Peony Lantern, and comparing it to a few more modern renditions. Finally, we've talked about suicide a lot in this episode. If you're thinking about harming yourself, please get help. I have listeners from all over the world, so I can't just provide one resource. However, Open Counseling's list of international suicide hotlines is linked from the episode page, and you can find it for yourself at blog.opencounseling.com/suicide-hotlines/. We'd love to hear from you about the podcast or about the new and improved website. Reach us through Patreon, through the website, readjapaneseliterature.com, Blue Sky at readjapaneselit.com, Facebook through the link on the website, and YouTube /@readjapaneseliterature. Thank you to the Japanese literature community on Blue Sky, especially Emily Balistrieri for information about Lonely Castle in the Mirror's Mystery Writers of Japan nomination, and Taylor Drew for some pronunciation clarification. Thank you to my friends on the Japanese literature group on Goodreads for help compiling a list of examples of bullying in Japanese literature. And thank you as always to producer Kaim for today's music, khaimusic.com.